This is Samantha and Zessie.
It's your boy, Remoy George Phillip, the first.
And this is Masculinity with a hard K.
Yo, I had a really cool meeting today with a playwright whose name I'm not going to mention yet, who's part of the Lit Council, who reached out to me because...
The Lit Council?
Yeah, I don't really know what the acronym stands for. It's LIT, because they're lit. Reached out to me because he heard the podcast.
Oh my God, how awesome.
Well, people
Yay, shout out to you, lit person.
Shout out to everybody that's listening.
Anyway, so you guys, we are here to talk about some things today. So as you know, on this show... we do our best to really unmask masculinity, right? The performance of the traits that we've come to know as masculine and how it's more detrimental to those performing it than it is beneficial.
Preach.
Yeah. So last week we got a bit deep talking about our own personal understandings of masculinity.
God, I love
it was a
getting
little
personal.
bit vulnerable, to
Sexy,
say the
can I say
least.
that? Pun intended?
But yeah, and I mean how that's contributed to upholding masculinity, right? And this week we're gonna zoom out a little bit, actually, and talk about sex, masculinity, and manhood.
Sex, woo!
Let's talk about sex,
Ooh,
baby.
yeah.
Let's talk about
So sex can be simple, but it can also be very complicated if we want to talk about it, which we're going to talk about it right now. It can bring people closer, but can also be used as a tool, which we'll get more into later in this conversation. As we question the habits that we've developed and call into question the power dynamics in the realm of sex, we ask these three following questions, right? How does our understanding of and our participation in having sex maintain our notions and standards of masculinity with a hard K? How do men's relationship to their bodies contribute to the performance of masculinity, again with a hard K? I like saying hard in this conversation. Most importantly, how do preconceived notions about the way men should, in quotes, act with regard to sex impact their freedom and excitement about sex? By now, we've realized that it's really best to leave these deep sexual conversations. That's wrong. All these deep conversations to the experts. So don't worry. Oh, man, these puns are awesome.
Yeah.
So don't worry. We have a special guest today who will help us work through this.
Yes, thankfully, we do have a men's coach here, Zat Baraka, to talk to us and just figure some of this stuff out, right? So Zat has been coaching men on sex and relationships for over a decade, working on a new masculinity through which sex is laced with intimacy and ecstasy and pleasure rather than like power and domination. So that's cool. Zat, welcome.
Thank you. So good. Glad to be here.
Awesome. So what do men come to you for?
Usually a lot of times what they come for is not what we end up working on, but, it's across the board, whether it's around relationship dissatisfaction or whether it's about, success in life, finding some meaning in life, living a purposeful life. I'll have men that have everything that they've wanted to create in terms of success, business and wealth, but they still feel unfulfilled in their life. And then of course there's plenty of men that are not able to maintain healthy relationships, and they don't really, so they'll come in with this idea of wanting to become better partners, and of course the work is their own internal work to prepare themselves to become a better partner. So men may come in for issues just around feeling generally insecure and not confident in the world. And then, we may be doing work around their sexuality, around their, wounding around that and all their imprints around what they think sex is supposed to be, how they're supposed to be in sex. So it's quite across the board, but, the focus of my work is called deep inner work or deep coaching. And so that's usually where we go. Yeah.
Understood. So it sounds like you're not just talking about like sex, but you're talking about kind of like life and sex and kind of like contextualizing it into kind of what people are going through on more of a daily basis, which I think is a perfect kind of like segue to to just kind of the way that we talk on the show, right, about performing masculinity and how that may be constraining for men, and how, like, for us, that can be kind of theoretical the way that we talk about it. But when men come to you wanting to get coaching, like, what are some of the concrete issues that they're actually sharing about around sex?
Feeling a lack of confidence in their sexual expression. There's men who have issues with like they're able to perform sexually, but they're not fulfilled, or they're not having enough sex, or or maybe their partner wants to have more sex than they do, and they don't have the libido. So that can be an issue for guys that tend to have a lot of insecurity and confidence issues. That's ED.
Yeah, let's live there for a second. Can we talk about ED?
Sure.
Can we spend some time there? Because I feel, it's either the butt of the joke, or it's something that's like glanced over or glossed over in like, general social commentary. And maybe there's like an ad on a train here in New York about some medication. But that's as far as we go with it. Like, men don't have this conversation regularly. We don't. And if we do, it's the butt of the joke. You can't have an honest, thoughtful conversation about it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So,
yeah.
But can we just real quick, actually, because I know ED because I've actually looked this up for our episode, but I'm not sure that all of our listeners know what you guys mean when you say ED.
ED just means erectile dysfunction. So when it comes to keeping your penis erect, and then it's not just keeping your penis erect, but I mean, that's the physical kind of manifestation, but we're talking about kind of how that is attached to performance anxiety, and how it's strictly not a physical manifestation or physical expression, but how it's a physiological and a psychological. Those two are connected, and the pressures of that. And how it's so severely tied to a person's sense of their own masculine self and their strength and their I'm a man, right?
Wow.
Yeah, well said. ED, erectile dysfunction, is not my specialty. It's not something that I focus on or advertise about. That's not my area of mastery. But I have had many men that come into the work that suffer in this area. And through doing this kind of deep inner work and this deep introspective work, doing men's work, it's great benefit to them. They find big transformation that happens to them. And I remember a couple years ago, I had 30-something guys in a row, 3 men in a row, completely unrelated, didn't know any of them. They didn't know each other, that came into the work. And all 3 of these healthy, these healthy 30-something-year-old men came in. They all had the same issue. And they were all pretty similar in the underlying issues and how that shifted for them. And they've all had a complete transformation in that through doing, this kind of deep internal work, looking at their wounds, their imprints, their traumas, their conditioning, their programming. And through doing this kind of work has transformed their whole outlook. And they've learned more about what sexual energy is, how to work with sexual energy, have a more healthy relationship, intimate relationship to their own sexuality. And even just having a conversation around, well, what is sexual energy? How does it work within you? What do you do with it? How do you cultivate it? It changes things. You're creating more intimacy with yourself rather than, oh, my penis isn't working. I want to have sex with my partner. My penis isn't working. What's wrong with me? And that's kind of the extent of what most guys go through. And then, like you said, they see an advertisement, in the subway, and it's like, oh, I better get that.
Yeah.
So,
I think, let's just be real. Like, I've had issues with ED. I have consistent conversations, intimate conversations with male friends who are like, oh, fuck, my dick didn't work last night, or I just don't know what's wrong with me. And it always turns out to be like, it's funny, right? And we kind of, again, skate around the conversation, or it becomes like a conversation that are centered around humor, but it's kind of lacking the humanity, just to be honest. And I think if it was a more consistent and honest and out there conversation, more men would be more prone to allowing themselves to be vulnerable to the conversation, admitting to it, and it not just being just some stupid joke, or it's a very minor few that have ED or have had moments where they don't have an erection or they lose erection. Jesus Christ, you don't always have an erection. It's okay.
Exactly, and just because your erection isn't firm one night doesn't mean you have to get a diagnosis that you have ED. Or even if you go through a 6-month period where you're not having strong erections, you don't have to have a diagnosis that there's something wrong with you. Mm-hmm. We go through all different kinds of phases, periods of times in our life where there's different things that are happening within us in emotionally, physically. Sometimes we have periods of time where we're not very healthy in our body. We could have illness. Sometimes we have emotional unhealth that's happening for us. So we go through a depression. And so when it's reframed in terms of when it's reframed in terms of this is the current challenge that you're facing, how can we work with this, rather than, oh, I have an illness or I have this dysfunction happening. It really is freeing to men because it sort of releases a lot of the self-judgment that there's something wrong with them.
I think that's really great because I feel like, we're talking about like physique and masculinity this season. We're talking about like just kind of more the physicality, right, of what we understand as the performance of masculinity. And I think it's really interesting to contextualize it in that way because I think that a lot of what comes up is shame around kind of like what we think of as dysfunction, or like when we think something's wrong with us, like humans in general, and then it gets compounded by the fact that, the performance of masculinity kind of leaves little room to express that, right? And so I feel like compounded with that, I think we just have a lot of shame around sex in general, whether the sex is good.
That's it.
It's just
nothing more. I mean, that's our core wound. That's our humans.
Yeah, puritanical thinking, preach.
Yeah.
I mean, that's all of our core wound as human beings. We're sexual beings. What runs our body is our sexual energy, our creativity. It's our sexual energy that animates us as living beings. That is what, if you look into different traditions, whether you're talking about chi or in that Taoist tradition, or whether you're talking about prana in the yogic tradition, this is our foundational sexual energy, of the energy that runs through our bodies. It's the energy that in one ejaculation can populate the U.S. 3 times over. That's the kind of energy. And of course, the shaming around that and the programming and the concepts around that, there's a lot of potential for neurosis, and there's a lot of potential for awakening in our sexuality. Yeah. And so issues that are reflected in our sex is, like our lack of vulnerability due to wounding or shaming. It could be something like, when you were 16, your friend, all your 16-year-old friends had sex and you didn't. There's a wound right there. There's something wrong with you, right? Or having a lot of sexual desire when you're young and not knowing how to handle it, how to be with it. And of course, there's the religious program for people around shame. That's a really huge one that I see a lot of that. And there's no relationship to our own sexual organs. Men are not taught to have a relationship and understand their own anatomy. And so it's a complete disconnection to our sexual energy and to our own anatomy, and compounded by all this shame. Well, how are you supposed to have a deeply satisfying, intimate sexual relationship with someone when there's all that happening?
Yeah. I think, shame is huge. And I think there is this notion that like men have to be like great at sex and we have to do it all the time and we're strong. And similarly though, it's, there's also this attachment to our bodies. And real talk, men have body image issues, especially in 21st century. Guys can feel horrible about their body. So if you're not physically strong, or you don't have the muscles protruding out of your 17-pack, or your chest isn't as wide as, I don't know, somebody's big-ass football player chest, you have these potential issues with your own body. And so if there's these stereotypes or these notions that men should be these big, strong, macho, physical, large physique leaders in sex, you may position yourself as abnormal or as othered or as not sexy or as not a man, right? Or masculine.
Yeah, that's really
and it's kind of setting ourselves up to fail, and setting these horribly unrealistic expectations. And I say that from experience because I felt that myself. Like, it's so unfortunate that in TV and in movies, the way that we download most of our narratives, that there aren't more stories that show men uncomfortable taking off their clothes, men uncomfortable having sex, men worried about how their sexual partner in the moment or long-term partner may perceive them as being vulnerable and naked, right?
Yeah.
Well, I'm wondering,
Very good point.
like, kind of piggybacking off of what Remoy just said, it's like, so we've got kind of like the big picture, right, of the general shame that we as a society feel around sex, good or bad as it may be. Then the kind of like zooming in a little bit on like if things aren't working properly, right? Like you actually, like if there's something wrong, quote unquote, then it's like, you want to figure out what's wrong, but you also can't really talk about it with anybody because people will find you out, right? So then that kind of like mental, like that kind of mental,
Tug of war.
Gymnastics, perfect. Yeah, tug of war, gymnastics. Yeah, all of that, right? That's kind of like just working on you, which is kind of like to go back to your point, Zat, of all the different factors that can impact somebody and their ability to perform, quote unquote, when it comes to sex. Like, what is the impact of that on somebody's like sense of self, specifically like a masculine person, a man's sense of self? Like, what are the consequences of these issues on people's not only sex lives, but their lives in general, to kind of continue to operate within that framework?
I mean, it's great suffering, it's great suffering. I mean, it's especially if you're not a man with self-awareness and you don't understand what's going on, all of that gets masked. All of that pain gets masked, and that shows up as compulsive sexual behavior. Addiction to pornography, maybe having, infidelity, prostitution, that kind of stuff. Also, another way that this shows up when you are really suffering is sexual repression. So, just really repressing your sexual desire and ignoring it and repressing it. And of course, we know what that does. That makes us become compulsive in other areas, whether it's being, shopping, food, drugs, becoming a workaholic, trying to achieve, becoming wealthy. And another one we could say is when this is happening and men are really suffering, they just are willing to sort of settle for status quo sex, meaning not really having very satisfying sex, but not wanting to speak up about it. And so just living a life where you're not fulfilled in your sexual expression, you're not in a healthy sexual relationship, and that's just kind of your existence. And we know that healthy sex, a healthy sexual life is a foundation for being a fulfilled human being. And so it's just so critical for guys to be willing to have this conversation. I mean, the men that come into the work, that do the work with me and the men's groups that I do and through our global community, men are they're liberated through being able to hear this, have a conversation about it, share their own challenges, get a reorientation to it, and start shifting it. Start actually not just shifting it through an intellectual process, but actually learning to work with your own sexuality, your own sexual energy. I mean, what would happen if CEO men across the country were learning this stuff? Think how much work environments would change.
Oh my God.
Work environments. Think how it would affect women in the work environment where men were more sexually mature, like we could say emotionally mature, but also sexually mature.
Yeah.
Well, they understand their own sexuality, their own desire, their own imprints and programming that they received maybe from older siblings, society, culture, when they were a kid. It would be a different world. And so
families
it is shifting,
would be
it is changing.
too. Like families would just be, that would be crazy.
Yeah, you're teaching your your sons, what these men would be teaching their sons, and how to relate to their own sexuality, and to saying, hey, it's okay to feel desire. Here's how we can understand, if you feel horny, there's something you can understand about that. Just for a man to be able to have that conversation with his son, rather than the imprints of, the guy who has sex the most is the most manly man, right?
And
those are. Mm-hmm.
yeah, no, I was just gonna say, and I would extend that also to like daughters, right? Because it's like, I mean, we've been talking on the show about like complicity and like daughters who are into men or into boys, right? Like just understanding also that there is like a standard, right? That so you're like, no, like go for somebody who is sexually mature. There's none of this boys will be boys stuff. There's none of this like, oh, well, this is just how boys are. You just have to like adjust yourself and understand that this is what's out there and that's what you get. Like that would also shift that expectation, which I find really powerful. Just kind of like having a different standard of what we allow ourselves, like as men and women and everyone in between and outside of that, to kind of like basically expect when it comes to like sexual maturity, sexual relational habits and things like that.
Yes.
So
yes, yeah. I mean, it's this. So it's as much about the programming that girls receive around, how they're supposed to be sexually, as it is like in an adult relationship that women have programming around men are supposed to be this way, and that kind of pressure that women put on men adds to the programming that men have, because women buy into it as much as men buy into it. So women buy into their own programming and the programming of men.
Yep.
And of course, men buy into their own programming, the programming, how they're supposed to believe women are supposed to be. And so, it's not just, this isn't only about men learning and evolving. Obviously, it's about women too. But you got to remember, women are already ahead of the curve, because women have had to fight, and women have had to evolve and themselves for a long time.
Yeah.
And that's why the men's movement, quote unquote, is so big now, because it's now just finally taking off. Like it's known that men have to evolve now. Women have been doing the work, and now men have to play catch up. And so it's a good thing. All these challenges that we're seeing, everything around Me Too and all the pressure that are on modern men is a good thing, because what does pressure do? It forces us to evolve.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, sorry. Speaking on that evolution, Samantha earlier said a term, the new masculine, and that's in regards to the work you're doing. Can you walk us through that a bit and what the new masculine means?
Yeah. So first thing I would say is new masculine. It's just a name. It's not. I don't have a whole theory on. I don't have a whole theory on new masculine. I'm not crazy about it. It was a term that I came up with just as a way to say men on the path of personal development are men who are redefining a new kind of masculinity.
Love it.
I mean, that's dope. That's a great tagline, if you ask me. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but I don't use it as another box or prescription that men have to be like, you have to be a man in the new life. Cool. So, I actually have a new name that is the name of my new men's organization, which is called Men's Wisdom Work. And the idea of new masculine, again, is just alluding to men that want to evolve themselves and have impact on the planet. We need to sort of just continue redefining and evolving this idea of what masculinity is. Yeah.
That sounds amazing. Well, in lieu of our conversation, how does sex relate to this particular context?
If you want to evolve yourself as a man, if you want to find more fulfillment, if you want to, move through the challenges that we as men have to, if you want to be part of the solution of the planet, if you want to have more fulfilling relationships, and you want to be a better father, and you want to have impact in the world, you want to feel like you're living a purposeful life, your sexuality can't be left out of the equation. That's a core thing. And it doesn't mean that you have to necessarily, we have to speak in language that out of the ordinary for guys. Like a lot of guys, they don't want to hear about tantra. They don't want to hear about anything, too far out of the box, right? But at the very least, you have to be willing to, like you said earlier, men are they have been unwilling to even explore their sexuality, that they're willing to just settle for, oh yeah, my sex life is fine, it's good as it is. But as they start to dig into it and look at it, so many men see like, actually, yeah, it's not really very satisfying, and I'm just sort of playing out this role. So you have to be willing to explore your sexuality and your performance of masculinity that plays out in your sexual life. And there's a lot of different lenses we can look at. Men, for example, who have been married for a long time, where there's not a lot of dynamic polarity in their relationship, meaning there's not a lot of passion in their sexual life. You can actually shift and transform that. But you have to learn about it. You have to understand what polarity is. And all this work happens through the kind of men's work that I do. And so re-understanding and redefining what masculinity can be, not as a prescription or a box, but what it can be. And so one of the things it can be, let's say, for example, let's talk about creating polarity. Polarity happens through two opposites, through two poles, right? A positive and a negative, or we can say a yin and a yang, or we could say the masculine and the feminine. When you have sameness in a relationship, that's really great. You're both on the same page. It's really great to figure out where your vacation is going to be, how to pay your bills and take care of family business. Sameness is great, but sameness isn't great in sex. Like if both people want to be really the dominant role in sex, then there's not really a person that is the receiver, or the person that is, holding that space as receiver, and the other person is holding the space as director. And that is the energy that creates passion and polarity. And so these basic ideas can be really helpful for men. Like, oh my God, I haven't even seen that in my relationship with my wife. That's exactly what we're doing. We're both totally passive, but I never really saw that before. But now they're getting a little context for what could be helpful. How can you create more polarity in your relationship, and what are ways that you can create that through your own sexual expression?
I love that, because I feel like it, and I think like to the point about like the kind of like understanding of men as being predators or hunters or whatever, like understanding kind of creating polarity in sex is like either one of the participants could really be like the dominant one or the non-dominant one, right? Which like I really appreciate, because I feel like when we're talking about masculine and feminine, we do put it in boxes, but really like it's really about what works for the people at hand, rather than like some kind of prescription that we think we have to maintain after like millions of years. So really
it's the same. It's the same in gay, gay as it is in straight sexual relationships. And so, you can have an agreement. You could say, hey, tonight I really want to be more directive in our sexual life.
That's fun.
It's absolutely fun to do that. Now, of course, sometimes you just want spontaneity, but if you're married and you have kids, there's not a lot of room for spontaneity when you have, two kids in the house. You have to plan your time with your partner, your husband, your wife, your lover, So having that is really cool, having some kind of agreement. But there's also some other work I do with men where they bring in they're in their own practice of being more directive in their sexual life. And so they're doing it as a playful practice with their partner. They're not telling their partner, but they're holding kind of this more directive masculine quality in their sexual experience. And their partners respond beautifully. There's a real beautiful response. It's not about domination. It's about creating more
polarity.
More polarity in the relationship. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. Can I say something?
Please do.
No, you may not. No,
Do not say anything on the podcast. No.
Even when you said, when Zat, when you kind of gave that about like, setting the rules for the evening, and then Samantha said, "Oh, that's cool," I got severely uncomfortable, and I think that's a majority of male or traditional, let's say traditional responses, because there's these certain expectations that we have to, a lot of transactional things in this world, a lot of experiences, and especially when it comes to sex, I've been conditioned one particular way, and I know these very rigorous rules, and to challenge that, to challenge my knowledge and understanding, also challenges my ability to control the situation and to understand what it is to be controlled. And in effect, really is kind of challenging to my own personal understanding of my own masculinity, because I've associated so much of my identity, therefore, and therein my masculinity, to being in control and to living by a set set of rules, especially when it comes to being so vulnerable, like I talked about earlier, about being myself within sex, and being so vulnerable, to lose that aspect of control and to allow myself to be so vulnerable makes me severely uncomfortable, which in this instance is a great thing.
Yeah, I get that. And in my experience, in doing this work, 75 to 80% of the men that I see that come into the work are men that want to work on their masculinity. Now, I'm not saying 75 to 80% of men on the planet necessarily, but at least men who come into the work are men that want to evolve. They want to understand their masculinity, want to feel more confident in their masculinity, understand it more. How do they bring that into the relationships or into their work life? And so there's nothing wrong with what you're saying, and with having those ideas of wanting to fulfill, some ideal of what being a masculine man means. As long as, of course, your ideas are kind of more rooted in what we may call more evolved rather than more neurotic, right? More neurotic, we may be talking about, domination. We may be talking about control. We're talking about, being self-centered, being selfish, controlling, arrogant. We'll just call that less enlightened kind of way of being masculine. And so it's totally okay to have what you're talking about, to want to have that, to be in a more masculine role and to fulfill that, as long as you know how to do it in a little bit more of a healthy, enlightened kind of way. And we could say the same in leadership. Men who were brought up without a healthy role model and what masculinity is may be leaders that are more about control, domination, intimidation, neurotic, so on and so forth. So, yeah.
Yeah, because I feel like it's really about freedom, right? And like self-expression being like a basically backing up a freedom of somebody rather than like, some compensation or not necessarily compensation, but fear, really, right? It's like freedom or fear, I think, kind of plays a role in this, because it's like I'm freely self-expressed in my ability to direct the situation, or I'm directing the situation for fear that, like, if it goes beyond my control, I won't know what to do, or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, that's good. No, that's a good way to put it. And the work that I do with men it is an enlightenment path, if that makes sense. It's about practice. This is about practicing being in a lived state of masculine qualities, which is actually all about freedom, because that is, I don't want to go down this road, but the masculine imperative is freedom. This is kind of imprinted in our biology. Men who identify as being more masculine, freedom is a really key word. That's a really important word. Men want freedom, and so if you think of freedom, you could think of a guy sitting on a boat fishing, like in a way that's freeing. You're just sitting there, two guys sitting on a boat fishing. They're not talking a lot. Generally, when you think of a woman, you don't hear many women saying, all I want to do is just sit on the fishing boat and say nothing and just be quiet. So it's an important thing to understand this context that I'm talking about. It can be really, really helpful for men to understand themselves better through this context, and how that plays out in your sexuality.
Along those lines of having this conversation, right? I mean, we got to freedom about like a freedom in terms of self-expression, but if we kind of dial a little bit back and talk about this like sense of control, domination, right, that like comes in the form of compensation, I think we would be remiss to have this conversation, especially in the context of the performance of masculinity, and not talk about control through sex. I don't think there has been, so much more talk about sexual misconduct and assault, and people actually being held to account for those actions as a society, like in society as of late. And I think it's really important to draw attention to the fact that, when it comes to sexual assault, abuse, misconduct, largely some people have an idea that, it might be about sex, but really, isn't it about power?
Yeah, they're interrelated. I mean, sex and violence, you've heard that term, sex and violence, sex and power are greatly intertwined. And so, yeah, it is about power, but it's also about our sexual energy. It's also about our wounding, our emotional wounding as kids, as children. It's about wounds that happen as children, and then when we come into our teenage years and our sexual energy gets activated, our wounds get plugged into our sexual energy. Seeing as I was saying before, our foundational energy as humans is sexual energy.
Yeah.
So you plug in your wounding to your sexual energy, and now you have an eroticized wound, and that can, of course, show up in terms of power, and that is one way that people deal with their wounds. Most people especially men, are not really willing to look at their wounds, and so what's the greatest way to avoid their wound is by projecting it all outward, blaming others, and then using control as a mechanism to avoid it. So yeah, wow. It's about power, but it's about wounding, and so. Our sex is infused with neurosis, and then this becomes our habitual sexual patterns.
So this is
as a child.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
No, I was gonna say this is really deep. Like you went for it in a way that I'm like super excited to dive. I wish we had more time to like dive more into this, because I think what I'm hearing you say is that inherently, kind of in our psyche, there's an inherent connection. I mean, so sex being kind of like the root of our foundational energy, I think I heard you say, or something like that. Our
sexual energy is our foundational. Our sexual energy is our life force. So how we're alive. It's what animates.
Right. Oh, obviously. Yeah. Actually, yeah. It's actually pretty simple when you think about it.
Yeah.
And so that neurosis or whatever, like the we can use it for or against us, and or for or against other people.
Yes. So our sexual energy can liberate us. It can liberate us, or it can create more suffering on the planet. It can be our pathway to more neurosis, or it can be our pathway to more fulfillment and more love and more intimacy. And so, that's why people who want to evolve themselves or get on the personal growth path, who are willing to look in this area, can really become more empowered, healthier, more fulfilled people when you work on healing these foundational issues that you have as a human being. Sex becomes more pleasurable. It's no longer just a place of control and shame and insecurity and habitual pattern and victimization. It becomes a place where the deepest heart connection and loving intimacy shows up. And wow, imagine if Donald Trump were to do this work.
God.
Imagine how the world would change. Imagine how he would care. He would be more interested in creating connection and caring in the world than just being domineering because of his wounding and his shaming. And so sex is the breeding ground for neurosis and for enlightenment.
Wow.
So any guys out there listening, any women out there listening, and you want to evolve yourself in any kind of way, if you're having unhealthy relationships, or maybe your relationships keep failing over and over, or you're unfulfilled in your sexual life, or you're sexually shut down, or if you're sexually abused, find someone, do the work, go for it, be a spiritual warrior, go for it, do this work. It will be the most transformational work that you could do. Look, talk therapy is great. It's important for people who are new on the path of personal development. Talk therapy is great, but if you can go even deeper and go to someone who does deep inner work, shadow work, sexual healing work, that's what I do. With that's not how I advertise myself, but many men who come into the work end up touching into this kind of stuff. It is the most liberating work, I would say. Liberating meaning it can help you to decrease your amount of fear, insecurity, and suffering, and help you to have deeper relationships, be more effective in all of your relational intimacy in your life, and be more successful even in your financial life. You're doing this kind of stuff.
Wow. Well, listen, you guys, you heard it here first.
Yeah, dog. I'm going straight to the website. I'm signing up. I'm learning. I'm searching Google in Brooklyn for all this kind of support. This is amazing.
Yeah,
Doc.
it is. It is amazing. Like, I really thank you for the really comprehensive look at the different ways that sex impacts our psyche, that we use it for various things, and also the way that we can kind of like use it to have some what am I looking for here? Damn it. I'm looking for a word. What's that?
Have more fulfillment. We'll have deeper intimacy. Look, even if you could do one simple different practice in your sex life, just bring in one simple different thing, it can have ripple effects to your life. If you would just be willing to try
openness,
something different in your relationship. Yeah, just get out of your habitual patterned, like you're having sex at, kids go to sleep, you have sex at 10 p.m. every night. It's the worst time to have sex. At the end of the day, you're tired, you're not feeling sensual, you're smelly, you're dirty, you're tired, you want to go to sleep. Like you can learn some real basic things. There's a million things online that you can pull information from. I just suggest to everyone, just do a little research. Try to bring something fresh to your understanding of how to create more intimacy and deeper connection and more fulfillment in your sexual life.
Awesome. Or go to Zat's website and procure his services, guys. Speaking of which, can you let the people know where to find you?
Yeah, you can go to zatbaraka.com, ZATBARAKA. And I have, I do one-on-one work with men, all kinds of men. It's deep, powerful. It's life-changing work. It's not life coaching. This is serious life transformation work. I also have a men's coach training through my men's organization. We're looking to create massive impact on this planet and create, help decrease violence against women and children and help men to be more awakened and more fulfilled and more successful. So I'm training men how to be men's coaches so that this can ripple out and affect more men on the planet. So I have my men's coach training. And then I also have an online men's program for guys who are maybe new to the work. And it's work you can do from home and have the experience of being in a men's group, which is the most important, I think, thing any man can experience is just getting into a men's group. It's really life-changing. So I have my online men's group, and all that stuff is on my website.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing, and thank you for doing the work. You guys will be posting all of Zat's information on our social media. Thank you, Zat, so much for all the knowledge that you shared today. It was really awesome, and it's just like instructive and great. So.
Yeah, and this is a really hard conversation to have sometimes, and this is a very easy conversation to be very judgmental on or very dismissive of. So thank you for keeping such a thoughtful and fostering such an open, conversation, and it's kind of an exciting conversation versus being a very critical conversation, right?
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me, and thanks for your involvement in this. Yeah, my honor to be here.
Awesome. Well, listen, so we said that we were going to post Zat's information, but of course you got to know where to find us. So we are on Facebook at Masculinity Podcast. Of course, with a K.
Okay.
With a K. On Twitter at Masculinity Pod and Instagram at Masculinity Pod as well, actually. So be sure to look us up there. My name is Samantha and Zessie.
It's your boy, Remoy George Phillip, the first.
And this has been Masculinity. Thank you for listening.
Peace.
Ciao.